This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. I went abroad on Valentine's Day, wanting to surprise my fiancé who is studying abroad. When I arrived at his place, I discovered that he was actually sharing an apartment with another female classmate. They went shopping together and kept pets together. Compared to me, they looked more like an engaged couple. I immediately returned home, canceled all his cards, and reclaimed the house I had given to his parents. I had already tolerated them for a long time. When I saw Tony, I had just arrived downstairs at his apartment building. He was accompanied by a girl. They were chatting and laughing, and Tony was holding a grocery bag. They only noticed me when they got closer. My fiancé Tony was stunned for a few seconds, and after realizing it, he didn't show any surprise. Instead, he subtly distanced himself from the girl and asked me in surprise, "Haley, what are you doing here?" I raised my phone and said, "Grandpa asked me to come and build a relationship with you." The girl next to him looked at me curiously and finally asked, "You are?" I glanced at her and answered, "I am Tony's fiancé." The girl was momentarily stunned, then smiled faintly, as pure as a lotus just out of the water. "Senior actually has a fiancé." The girl playfully tapped Tony on the arm. "Senior, why have you never mentioned this to me? And your fiancé is so beautiful. You're not being considerate at all." Before the girl could finish, Tony frowned and looked at me. "Where are you staying? It's not easy to get a taxi around here at night." I chuckled. "I remember this apartment has 2 rooms, right? Didn't I have my assistant help you find it? Can't I stay here? I don't mind contacting the landlord for another key." With that, I dragged my suitcase into the apartment building's elevator. Tony and the girl followed silently behind me. Upstairs, the girl used a key to open the door. I rolled my suitcase inside and immediately sat on the living room sofa. I scrutinized the two of them. I didn't get a chance to ask outside, "Miss, who are you and why are you in my fiancé's apartment?" Tony answered before the girl could. "She's a junior in my major, named Serena. She was bullied in the school dormitory and had nowhere to stay. I thought since she's also from China, I'd let her stay here for now. There's an extra room anyway." You really can laugh when you're speechless. That's exactly how I felt now. "Oh, so, you two are living together now?" Serena, still awkwardly standing at the entrance, quickly denied. "No, sis-in-law, I'm just temporarily troubling Senior. Housing abroad is too expensive, and as a girl just arriving, I'm afraid to live alone." I looked at the bag she was carrying and lifted my chin. "That bag of yours is enough to cover half a year's rent." Serena's delicate face slowly turned red, and she said with a trembling voice, I'll start looking for a place tomorrow and move out as soon as I find one. Please don't be angry, sis-in-law." Tony finally couldn't help but shout at me, "Haley, don't be too sensitive." This was the first time Tony had spoken to me so loudly. He had been educated to be refined since childhood, and his demeanor became even more gentle after studying art, rarely losing his temper. I scoffed, "Sensitive? Tony, you're living with a girl without informing your fiancé. Do you want Miss Serena to be called a mistress, or do you want me to be misunderstood as a mistress?" Tony was left speechless. I rolled my eyes. "Forget it, it's late now." I turned to Serena and said, "I'm not unreasonable. Since you two are only helping each other, as you just mentioned, please find a place and move out as soon as possible." I dragged my suitcase into Tony's room and left him to sleep on the sofa. I took a shower in Tony's room's bathroom. When I opened the bedroom door, I saw the other two in the kitchen. The petite girl was feeding the guy next to her with food from the pot while he was chopping vegetables. "Serena, Senior, did I cook well this time?" Tony, "There's improvement." "Serena, Senior, did you teach me well? Does it taste like home?" I leaned against the door frame and watched. The two were wearing couple's aprons, growing closer and their intimate gazes almost tangible. Click. Hearing the sound, they instantly separated, their faces flushed. "Oh, they're performing a forbidden romance right under my nose. A toad climbing on the back of a foot doesn't bite, but is disgusting." "Tony, we need to video call my grandfather later. He's going to the operating table tomorrow." I had been working non-stop for over 3 months to get abroad before my grandfather's heart surgery. The doctor said the success rate of the surgery wasn't high, so it was best to fulfill any wishes my grandfather had before the operation. I knew my grandfather was trying to pressure me into marrying soon, even though I excel and have led the age group to new heights. In my grandfather's eyes, a woman can never inherit the family business. He desperately needed a manageable, respectable son-in-law, and Tony was his most preferred choice. My grandfather always said that as long as I gave birth to a boy, he would take my surname, and my son would be considered the true heir of the H family. Originally, I planned to get a local marriage certificate abroad this time and send a photo to my grandfather. But given Tony's situation, getting the certificate now would be repulsive to me. After dinner, we went back to his bedroom to discuss matters. Tony, handle your Miss Serena. I don't want any issues when talking to my grandfather. This call would determine whether I could fully control the company. The shares my grandfather held were something I must obtain. Haley, what do you mean my Serena? Serena and I are not that kind of relationship, don't misunderstand. Tony's tone had softened a lot compared to when I first arrived. Men are naturally good at pretending. I directly ignored him and continued. By the way, I've already purchased that antique painting you always wanted. Also, I have the invitation to Chris's private exhibition in a few days. For those in the art world, meeting Mr. Chris is an opportunity that comes rarely. Once recognized by Mr. Chris, becoming an international art master could happen in an instant. These were the conditions for him to cooperate with me in appeasing my grandfather. Alright, when should we video call Grandpa? Now. We had a half-hour video call across countries. It seemed my grandfather was about to enter the operating room. After hanging up, Tony didn't let go of the arm he had draped around my shoulder. I was reviewing the stock transfer documents my grandfather had sent me, while subtly trying to pull away from his embrace. But he tightened his hold. Haley, I'm really happy you came to see me. Tony slowly rested his chin on my shoulder, rubbing his nose against my neck. If he had done this before going abroad, I might have been moved. After all, we grew up together. Tony has always been handsome, and I was the only girl around him. But he had always been indifferent. Now, for some unknown reason, he seemed to want to develop our relationship further. If I hadn't seen him blushing around Serena, I might have settled for it. But now, creating trouble before marriage is clearly not very smart. I expressionlessly pushed him out of the bedroom. I hadn't had a proper rest since getting off the plane, so don't delay my sleep. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of a dog barking and rubbed my eyes as I opened the bedroom door. Serena was dressed in sportswear and had a large golden retriever with her. I hadn't noticed that there was a dog in the apartment yesterday. Good morning, Haley. I'm taking Dubby for a morning run. I'll go house hunting at noon. Serena greeted me cheerfully, as if yesterday's awkwardness didn't exist at all. She put the leash on the golden retriever and said, "Good boy, Dubby. Let's go for a run with mommy." Then she called out to Tony, who was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "Senior, it's the weekend. Don't forget to prepare canned food for our son. Come on, Dubby, let's say goodbye to Daddy." Serena grabbed the dog's paw, waved to Tony, and then bounced out of the apartment with the dog. All right, finally met someone who's genuinely a green tea bitch. Tony didn't say a word throughout, just smiling awkwardly at me. At noon, Tony took me to a French restaurant. As soon as we sat down, we ran into a couple, both of whom were Tony's French classmates. The French guy greeted Tony in French. "Tony, you're actually on a date." Serena posted on her social media about house hunting. "Did you two have a falling out?" Tony frowned and denied it. But the guy, seeming to stand up for Serena, continued. "So, is this beautiful lady you're dating your admirer? Doesn't she know you and Serena are a couple?" The French girl next to him also commented in French, "Dating someone else while knowing you have a girlfriend. You're the other woman." Tony finally spoke up, replying to them in French. "It's not what you think. It's a bit complicated, so don't jump to conclusions." He was vague and didn't answer directly. "I'm someone who cares a lot about face." The other woman? Fine. Tony and Serena are a couple at school, right? I asked the guy directly in French. I think so. The three of them hadn't expected me to speak French too. "I'm Tony's fiancé. We've already had an engagement party. If anyone is the other woman, it should be your Serena." With that, I stood up and, with a swift motion, poured the red wine I had on the table all over Tony's face. "Tony, I've never faced such humiliation. Our Haley's husband doesn't have to be you." Tony, ignoring his embarrassment, hurriedly explained my identity to his classmates. I suddenly found that I didn't understand him anymore. Although I wasn't in love with him to the point of obsession, I did like him. I had always considered him as my future husband, but the past few days of interactions had caused me to waver. Losing my appetite for the meal, I got up and left the restaurant. Influenced by my family since childhood, I subconsciously believed I would marry Tony when I grew up. Neither Tony nor I were rebellious. Family alliances were very normal in our circle. But now, he had crossed my bottom line. I had heard that the young master of the Chin family had eloped with a small-time celebrity, making the Mang family's daughter a laughingstock. Mang's stock plummeted and has yet to recover. In economics, there's a term called risk aversion. Although I had invested a lot upfront in this relationship, reevaluating the risks and value of this marriage didn't seem proportional. I could easily find a partner with a higher safety factor for marriage. I had just taken control of the age group. I couldn't afford any mistakes now. In fact, Tony and I weren't even a true family alliance. It was only because Tony's grandmother was my grandfather's unfulfilled love. My grandfather was a playboy when he was young, and Tony's grandmother left him to marry an ordinary teacher. After Tony's grandmother passed away, my grandfather regretted his past actions and could only compensate through the descendants of his unfulfilled love. Tony resembled his grandmother very much and even inherited her artistic talent. So even though Tony came from an ordinary working-class family, my grandfather gave his family the highest respect and called it a family alliance. I originally planned to pack my things and move to a hotel, but perhaps because I had been so busy before and suddenly relaxed, plus a bit of acclimatization issues, I felt a bit dizzy. I intended to rest briefly after entering the bedroom, but I ended up falling into a deep sleep. No one returned to the apartment until it was dark. I vaguely heard male and female voices talking outside the door. Soon, Tony opened the bedroom door. Haley, I was helping Serena look for a house in the afternoon. We haven't found a suitable one yet. Haley? I struggled to sit up. Do you have any fever medicine here? I must have a fever. Before Tony could answer, a scream came from the living room. It sounded like Serena had pinched her hand while closing the door. Tony didn't hesitate for a second and rushed out of the bedroom. After a flurry of commotion with opening and closing doors, the apartment fell silent. I faintly heard Serena crying, saying that she couldn't play the piano anymore and needed to go to the hospital. I weakly called out a few times, and sure enough, they left. Typically, a fever like this would be gone after taking some medicine and resting. But I didn't even have the strength to get out of bed, let alone go buy medicine. I didn't want to trouble others. But being in a foreign country, besides Tony, only a business contact of mine could help. After the secretary of the business contact answered the phone, she immediately arranged an ambulance and took me to a private hospital. The doctor said if I had come a little later, it would have turned into pneumonia. I stayed in the hospital for 2 days. During this time, Tony only called me once, but I was in an exam and missed the call. I was discharged on the 3rd afternoon, and the business contact's car brought me back to the apartment. That day, I was supposed to attend Chris's private exhibition with Tony. I had promised to get him an invitation, but I planned to take another one and go by myself. Mr. Chris's wife is my friend, and I was also here to see her. However, when I returned to Tony's apartment, I neither saw Tony nor his classmate, nor could I find the invitation. In the bedroom, my luggage was open, and its contents were scattered all over the place. If I hadn't seen my computer still neatly placed on the desk, I would have thought the apartment had been robbed. I called Mr. Chris directly. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, I told him that my 2 invitation letters had been stolen. If someone uses them to attend, please be sure to report it to the police. The invitation letters for the private exhibition had names and numbers on them. Just check who used my name. Mr. Chris was very angry upon hearing this and sent me the live surveillance footage from the exhibition's entrance. As expected, it was Tony and Serena. It was raining outside, and I nearly laughed myself sick when the 2 were thrown out by the security guards. Their white evening gowns were filthy. On the footage, they looked dirtier than stray dogs as they got up from the ground. Then this couple was taken away by the police. Having been in the business world for so many years, I've never been a saint. After obtaining Mr. Chris's approval, I sent the surveillance video directly to Tony and Serena's school forum. I also anonymously posted about Tony's engagement and his flirty behavior with other girls. I'm sure their lives at school will be quite eventful from now on. After meeting Mrs. Chris, I returned to my country. Grandfather's surgery was not successful. He was transferred to the ICU postoperatively and remained unconscious for days. I received a call from my father right after I got off the plane. Just a few hours ago, grandfather had passed away due to sudden cardiac arrest. My mood was unaffected. In fact, I felt a sense of relief. Grandfather had wanted a grandson, a male heir, for the latter part of his life. But perhaps the more one desires something, the less likely one is to get it. Grandfather was a philanderer in his youth, and my grandmother, whom he married through a family alliance, was not easy to handle. After giving birth to my father, grandmother dealt with countless mistresses and illegitimate children. Eventually, she couldn't tolerate it any longer and forced grandfather to undergo a vasectomy. My father, however, was a romantic, deeply in love with my mother. Mother died after giving birth to me. After her death, grandfather repeatedly tried to send me away, saying that as long as I was around, my father wouldn't be able to forget my mother. He wanted my father to remarry quickly, hoping for a grandson. But my father inherited grandmother's ruthless nature and underwent a vasectomy himself. So in our generation, I am the only remaining bloodline. Grandfather had no choice but to bring me back from the orphanage. Before I displayed my business acumen, grandfather saw me merely as a vessel for his future great-grandson. Since my father was unwilling to take over the company, I worked tirelessly through university, bringing in billions in profits for the company. This was when I finally gained grandfather's recognition and was regarded as a true family member. After grandfather's funeral, I received news from a private investigator. Tony and Serena had ended up in bed together after drinking. It seemed that Serena had plotted against Tony out of insecurity, though Tony was also somewhat complicit. They thought that being abroad, even if their reputation was tarnished, nobody would know when they returned to their country with their diplomas. Breaking off the engagement? Your grandfather has just died, and you're treating our family like this? Tony's mother was as sharp-tongued as ever. Look at you, you're almost 30 now. Besides our Tony, who would want you? I signaled my assistant to hand the annulment agreement to Tony's parents. The dowry Tony had given at the engagement was also placed on the table. Although it was called a dowry, it was just a few pieces of gold-plated jewelry. Grandfather had been eager to arrange the marriage with Tony, saying that no dowry was needed and just a few pieces to go through the motions would suffice. So I received this box of fake gold jewelry. Mrs. Tony, please sign the annulment agreement. The gifts exchanged between our families will be returned according to the original list. The assistant explained to them. Haley, who do you think you are? Does our Tony fear you? Tony's mother grabbed the agreement from the table and tore it up. I raised my hand, signaling the assistant to bring another copy of the document. The assistant continued. This is evidence of Tony's infidelity, including intimate photos with that lady, chat records, hotel records, and the school's disciplinary notice regarding the negative public opinion. These are enough to prove that Tony is not suitable to continue this engagement with our Haley. Tony's mother's face turned red instantly, but she remained aggressive. What's wrong with having a close female friend? A woman pursuing my son shows that he is exceptional. Tony's father, usually a gentle university professor, abandoned his elder's demeanor and stammered. This is just a misunderstanding. Tony was just seduced by that woman. The assistant sneered. Our Haley hopes that both families can resolve this amicably without causing too much of a scene. Of course, if Tony refuses to cooperate, we don't mind taking legal action to resolve this. Tony's mother fell silent for a few seconds, but still, lacking confidence, continued to press. How dare you defy your elders? What about your upbringing? I lounged casually on the sofa, crossing my legs, and wore a not-so-friendly smile. Silence them with my indifference. This is the only time we discuss this calmly. If the two of you continue to refuse, please wait for the court summons. The assistant said impatiently, glancing at the watch. Stop. Tony's father interjected. He cared most about his reputation, and a court case would ruin his esteemed image at the university. Ignoring Tony's mother's shrill protests, he signed the new annulment agreement. My mother named me Haley, hoping I would maintain the innocence of my childhood and grow up as healthy as a fine tree. But I didn't expect to be shackled by the traditional preference for sons over daughters so early on. Originally a tree, how could I willingly become a parasitic vine? Now, I finally have a sense of control over my own life. I left the remaining matters to my lawyer and assistant. I canceled the bank cards of Tony's parents and Tony, who was in France, and revoked all VIP privileges. Tony's villa was also reclaimed with the help of security guards after some complications. For more than 20 years, they had treated the wealth we gifted them as their own, which is why they signed the annulment so readily. Foolish, but it saved me a lot of trouble. Tony returned to the country, reportedly having sold many of his designer clothes to pay for the ticket. Boss Haley, Tony is now at the company entrance. And what's he doing? He's kneeling at the gate with a huge bouquet of roses. Kneeling. It's absolutely ridiculous. The assistant complained. All right, have security remove him. If that doesn't work, call the police. I had a pile of contracts to review. The domineering CEOs in novels might spend their days in romance, but the real ones are machines working 24/7. Though I earn a lot too. I stopped taking Tony and his family seriously. In fact, if it weren't for grandfather and his grandmother, Tony wouldn't have even reached the high society circle with his rich young master and poor little flower love story. Yet some people still try to make things difficult for me. When I went back to my father's house to get some documents, I saw Tony sitting in the living room as soon as I walked in. My stepmother was speaking to Tony with a loving expression. Yes, even though my father loved my mother to the point of madness, he couldn't stand the loneliness of his body. To prevent him from fooling around and potentially creating a biochemical brother for me abroad, I chose a new wife for him with a clean family background. Haley, you're finally back. We've all been waiting for you, my stepmother said, pulling my hand with a tone of familiarity. Tony came specifically to see you, saying he wants to explain the previous issues. Couples don't have grudges that last overnight. Tony told me it was all a misunderstanding. He was just an ordinary classmate. Haley, it's not that Ann is criticizing you, but if a man has many flowers and grasses around him, it shows he's excellent. You shouldn't use your power to suppress him just because of a minor issue. I pulled my hand away from my stepmother and said, Stepmother, don't speak without understanding the facts. I don't mind choosing a less intrusive wife for father. My stepmother's expression changed slightly at my words, and she lowered her head, remaining silent. Tony, who had been sitting on the sofa, looked up and softly broke the silence. Haley, I know I was wrong. Can you give me a chance to make amends? I rolled my eyes. A chance? I've given you at least 20 years of chances. There are plenty of suitable candidates. It's far better to have a partner with contractual integrity than a man who disrespects his fiancé and has unstable feelings. No more cliché drama of unrequited love, snuffed out in the cradle. Tony's face turned pale, and he opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. I turned and walked towards the study. Haley, Tony suddenly shouted. I resisted because it was an arranged marriage by the elders. I deliberately distanced myself from you because I didn't want to compromise, but I surrender now. His eyes were slightly red, and his voice was choked. I don't want to lose you. I regret it. Oh, crazy. I slammed the study door shut and sent a message for the villa's security to clear out any intruders. Months passed in a flash, and everything was calm. Just when I thought Tony's family would no longer appear in my sight, they pulled a big stunt. Tony's mother posted a video on TikTok. In the video, she cried, saying her son knew he was wrong and begging for forgiveness from his daughter-in-law. Then the camera panned to Tony, dejectedly sitting by the roadside, drinking in the rain. The caption read, "How can a relationship of over 20 years be ended so abruptly? It's not his fault that he attracted other women due to his excellence." Tony was already handsome, and the video made him look like a classic brooding male lead. Some rival businesses leaked information, and marketing accounts flocked to cover the story. The glamorous romance of a wealthy family was much more intriguing than the real or fake hype in the entertainment industry. So, oh my god, is this the love story of a wealthy family's childhood sweethearts? I thought dramas were exaggerated enough, but life is even more dramatic. So even wealthy heiresses can break up over jealousy. With all their money, they can only suffer a bit in love. In a corner unknown to the young lady, this perfect handsome man has quietly fallen apart. It turns out good men are not in circulation. Marketing accounts intentionally or unintentionally portrayed me as a domineering rich girl. Some influencers, seeking attention, interpreted the situation from another angle. This fiancé isn't like the vicious female antagonist in web novels. The man must follow the elders' arranged marriage, even if he has a crush. He can only silently protect her, for the sake of family. He has to bow to the vicious female antagonist and seek reconciliation. Reality mirrors a tragic novel. Soon, netizens discovered my identity. But before keyboard warriors could launch their attacks, they were silenced. Because our PR department had prepared a plan in advance. The trending search term heiress of H group breaks off engagement with scumbag shot to the top of major social media platforms. The PR department released evidence of Tony's infidelity and the timeline. And attached were the bills of over $100 million from Tony's spending under our family group's account in recent years. The company's legal department quickly gathered evidence of unscrupulous marketing accounts and influencers spreading false rumors, initiating legal proceedings without letting any slip through. So, despite a brief drop in company stock, it quickly rebounded and even exceeded previous levels. After learning the facts, netizens labeled me the modern heroine of a revenge novel. Tony's family was slapped in the face, and many ordinary women came forward to support me. They felt that the pain from their past experiences with scumbags had eased a little after seeing Tony's downfall. Tony's mother, enraged by my lack of sympathy, went live and started a tirade. Who cares about that worthless Haley from the H family? What's wrong with my son being pursued by other women? Why is it a problem for him to have an affair? She's been engaged for years and still won't let my son touch her. What's she pretending for? My son has to satisfy his physical needs elsewhere because she's an unworthy fiancé. Besides, even if my son has someone else on the side, other women's children will still call her a mom. In ancient times, the main wives would even encourage concubines to have children. Isn't it better that she doesn't have to give birth herself? Tony's mother's twisted logic flowed freely as she spat out venom in the live stream. With the boost from trending searches and my discreet financial support, the live stream quickly drew an audience of 100,000. Just as Tony's mother was in full swing, a connection request popped up on her phone. She fumbled and accepted it. The person connecting was a pure and beautiful girl. Why are you connecting with me? Are you trying to pursue my son? Not everyone can enter our family's door. Tony's mother looked disdainfully at the girl, noting her lack of wealth based on her attire. The girl smiled gently and spoke, causing Tony's mother to freeze, and the chat paused for a moment. Sister, I'm pregnant with Tony's father's child. It's going to be twins. Shouldn't I be the one to sit in the position of Tony's mother? You, what are you saying? I'm carrying Tony's father's child. He promised me he would divorce you. Seeing Tony's mother's face turn pale, I felt a surge of satisfaction. When I hired a private detective to investigate Tony, they accidentally discovered that Tony's father had already been involved with a female student. Initially, the girl had been pursuing academic research but later became his long-term mistress under his influence. Tony's father had promised her that he would divorce Tony's mother this year, making her Tony's wife, so she wouldn't need to study or work. A few months ago, when the girl became pregnant and demanded marriage, Tony's father kept postponing. During her checkups, I had arranged for 2 nurses to be present, leading to gossip about the mistress creating chaos in front of the wife, which infuriated her into a divorce. Unexpectedly, Tony's father had a consistent taste for foolishness. The mistress, seeing Tony's mother finally make an appearance, acted impulsively and caused a scene in the live stream. The viewers in the stream reacted with venomous comments. Just said the legitimate wife hoped the mistress would have kids, and now here they are? Tony's mother, why don't you smile? Turns out cheating runs in the family, bloodlines are truly mysterious. Oh, your husband is so excellent, what's wrong with other women pursuing him? Pink noodle twisty little image.jpg. Tony's mother finally reacted, her face turning red as she pointed at the girl and began cursing. Within a minute, both live streams were shut down. What a grand spectacle. Later, my assistant told me that Tony's father had been rushed to the ICU. It was unclear if he was overwhelmed by his wife and mistress or if the exposure of his true nature had him in distress. After the commotion caused by Tony's father's mistress, the public relations crisis on my end was smoothly resolved. Search terms like Tony and father's infidelity and a famous professor's mistress versus legitimate wife were supposed to trend for a few days, but by the next day, they had disappeared. Removing trending searches was far more expensive than getting them to trend, and no one knew where Tony got the money. My diligent assistant updated me with the latest news. It turned out that Tony had borrowed $1 million in high-interest loans. The cost of removing the trending searches and covering Tony's father's hospitalization amounted to hundreds of thousands. Meanwhile, Serena had sent news from France saying she was pregnant and demanded $500,000 from Tony for her confinement. It seems Serena didn't realize that without me, Tony was just an ordinary middle-class person. The $1 million was not easy to repay, and Tony's father had lost his position as a university professor. Unexpectedly, they had no intention of repaying it. Shortly after Tony's father woke up, the family of 3 took the remaining money and secretly left the country. Tony had always considered immigration. He thought only foreign citizenship matched his artist status. Under his influence, Tony's mother also believed that the grass was greener abroad, so they fulfilled their dream of leaving. Years later, while waiting at a traffic light, I happened to run into a familiar face. Serena, heavily made up, was being held down and beaten by a CEO's wife on the roadside. She had been pregnant with Tony's child back then, and now that she had returned to the country, I wondered about Tony's family. Seeing my thoughtful expression, the assistant clarified my confusion. In recent years, our group had expanded into France. The collaborator who had helped me would occasionally reveal gossip during the handover with my assistant. Tony's family had entered the country illegally and had no proper identity, so they could only rent a place in the poorest neighborhood. Within a few days, all the money they brought from China was stolen. When Serena learned about their situation, she had a falling out with Tony. During the argument, Tony's mother pushed her, causing her to fall and lose the 5-month-old baby. Later, Serena didn't even receive her graduation certificate and returned home in disgrace. Tony, meanwhile, struggled to make ends meet by selling paintings on the streets abroad. The assistant paused here, looking conflicted. I urged him to continue, and the assistant said, according to Jefferson, Tony seems to have turned to crime. This revelation left me feeling complex emotions. I didn't let the assistant continue or focus on this family any further. Respecting others' fates. Now, I have money, power, and freedom. I can enjoy a life that truly belongs to me. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.